Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks what atheists should be doing next in a godless world.
Today we continue our focus on organizing and activism, but through slightly different channels. We're joined by Sarah Levin, the founder of Secular Strategies, to talk about the politics of secularism from the grassroots to the halls of power. She had previously worked in organizing, but with her firm she focuses on policymakers, nonprofits, political organizations, and legislators to empower the religiously unaffiliated. Sarah, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Great to be here.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for coming on. Let's just start by talking about how you would describe your own religious views.
Sure. So I go by a few different labels. I identify as an agnostic atheist, a humanist, a secular Jew. I would also, sometimes I combine them. I'm a humanistic Jew as well. I often, I'm sure you all have had this experience of explaining to someone the difference between atheist and agnostic, right? So I'm very, very precise in the dictionary definition there. So for those listeners who might be mistaken that agnostic means I'm not sure, no, it means that I'm acknowledging that it is not 100% knowable, but I'm pretty damn sure.
Yes.
And I'm culturally Jewish, so that's definitely a culturally huge part of my life. But I have no connection and do not practice Judaism, and which is why I actually really, really love working with one of my clients, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which provides a home for non-theistic cultural Jews like myself, of which there are many.
Well, before we talk about your work now, let's go back to your work with the Secular Coalition for America. And there you're working on grassroots mobilization. So it's much more individual people trying to have their voice heard. Can you tell us about your experiences working with bottom-up organizing and how, if you find it different from top-down organizing?
Yeah, so I should just clarify that I wore many different hats at different times at my 6 years at the Secular Coalition. And so I did a lot of grassroots organizing there and was director of their grassroots programs for a while, but I was also director of government affairs. So I've done both the grass tops, I call it, as well as the grassroots. And I actually think that effective activism really has to encompass both. So when it comes to, the individual, to your question, I think people sometimes lose sight of the fact that your elected officials, like, you pay them. That's your taxpayer dollars at work. You pay their salary. And I think this idea that that it's this special different world of politics that is inaccessible to you as a constituent is really something that we need to get more and more people to get past, because I think especially once you start getting involved, especially at the state and local level where so much of the action is at, you'll find it's actually a lot more accessible than you think. I remember working with folks, and most of what I was doing was really sure, I was, doing work directly with congressional offices and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, they work together because you have more political clout walking into a congressional office if they've received letters from your constituents, right? If they know that you have people power behind you, right? So that's how those things work together, because I'm going to be able to bend the ear of a member of Congress much more easily if my constituency is already on the map, if their staff have already interacted with my constituents, that they know that my constituency that I'm there representing in that office is active, and if they're pissed off, it could be a problem, and if they're happy, are a benefit to them, right? So I would, going back to the accessibility, I remember a lot of what I would do is empowering constituents to advocate for themselves and talk to their legislators directly, or to their staff, because at the end of the day, me as a lobbyist, I can only have so much sway, but it has so much more impact when you're an actual voter from the community talking to an office. And I remember, for example, one time I was training someone in Ohio on how to reach out and schedule a meeting. And in that particular state, maybe it wasn't Ohio, maybe I think it was a smaller state. In that state, the legislators didn't have staff. Because, if you're in California, you've got staff, right? Some legislatures are full-time and some of them are part-time. And a lot of them that are part-time, especially in small states, they don't have any staff or they have very little staff. And so when they scheduled a meeting, they actually got a meeting with their state legislator and got coffee with them, right? That's something that I think we really need to demystify. Like, these are, first of all, just people, and also they work for you. You pay their salary. And the things that they are voting on directly impact your life. So rather than feeling like, you've got these lobbyists top down, and sure, there's a place for that. Like, grass tops work is important as well. But grassroots feeds grass tops, right? Because you want to have that people power. And you as a member of the community, when you're talking to an office about issues, you're a subject matter expert. You know how these issues impact you, how they impact your community, and why they matter to you. So this idea that you have to just have this unbelievable, a PhD in something to have a conversation with an office about an issue is really not the case. What happens, especially at the state and local level, is so few people actually take the time to build these relationships. Show up to the town halls, show up to the constituent coffee, schedule a meeting, like we had people do, and make their voices heard, which means that the opposition, right, which is doing that very regularly in a very organized fashion, has an outsized impact because they're doing that stuff all the time.
You've also worked with the Democratic Party in a number of different capacities, including in the most recent presidential election. Could you tell us a little about that?
So in my personal capacity, I do serve as an open atheist on the DNC Interfaith Council. And I am also, in a professional capacity, the program director of Secular Democrats of America, which is a PAC. And I was really honored to be part of the Humanists for Biden advisory council that supported, just like it sounded, was mobilizing humanists and secularists to support Biden for president. And he did very, very well with the non-religious community. In fact, we know that atheist agnostics and the sort of nothing in particulars, the nuns, really made a difference in the last election. And I think a huge part of that was the fact that science was on the ballot. And that is really a top issue for our community. There's so much work to be done. Obviously, I think there's still a lot of bias against non-religious people. There's still issues that we're facing at the state and local level with the Democratic Party around things like party meetings starting with prayer, or just not really having a space for openly secular people not really being top of mind. And it's not always malicious. It's really just that when you don't have someone at the table to speak up and say, that's actually not inclusive, or here's how we can be more inclusive, or here's a secular perspective on this issue that we all agree on as progressives, then the machine's going to work how it's been working forever, right? And so we're really trying to, and I say we, meaning I as a member of the Interfaith Council, I'm trying to really build that bridge between Democrats of faith and the non-religious in the party, because we really do share values. We, at the end of the day, we agree on way more than we disagree on. And it's really just about building understanding. I mean, for my own co-chairs and the people that I work with at the DNC, just having a personal relationships enough so that they can ask me a question and not feel embarrassed about it, right? And what words should I use in this? Where is the sensitivity? And me feeling comfortable saying, hey, can we put it this way instead of that way, because this is actually a sensitive issue for the community, right? Being able to have that conversation requires trust. It requires sitting at the table, even if sitting at the table is sometimes uncomfortable for you. I mean, you have to, there's a two-way street here where I think the problem that atheists have in particular when it comes to any kind of interfaith work is that interfaith work, when it's people of faith sitting next to each other at the same table, right? They may have different faith beliefs, but they all have beliefs. They all have and supernatural beliefs, right? They can kind of relate to each other from that perspective. And we're kind of the lone person at the table that are distinct from everyone else, and that we don't have any supernatural beliefs, and that's a big jump for people, right? But I have found that just being at the table changes behavior, because just by being a decent person and I hate to use the phrase because I just don't have a better one, but being a good faith partner, right?
Right. Yes.
Just
Yeah.
really working in good faith with people, where you're really trying to get things done and you're really trying to meet them where they are. It's usually returned back at you.
The Interfaith Council, is that part of the Democratic Party?
So the DNC Interfaith Council is part of the DNC. So that's why, I'm not in this podcast representing the DNC, but I do in my personal capacity serve on that council. And one of the things that I do there is really just trying to build bridges between faith communities and that are support the democratic agenda, as well as secular Democrats.
How does an agnostic atheist get onto an interfaith council?
Okay, let me tell you the story, because the answer is grassroots and showing up. The grassroots part of this is that in 2016, when I was still the Secular Coalition for America, we did a nonpartisan program where we were reaching out to non-religious people in every political party. We were trying to reach secular Republicans, secular Democrats, secular Greens, secular Libertarians. So I went from the Texas Democratic Convention to run a secular caucus to the Libertarian Convention a few weeks later to get a secular caucus there, right? So we were reaching out to everybody. And in 2016, I'll never forget it, because my boss was like, if you had me fly out here to Texas and no one shows up to this event, I'm really going to be pissed at you. I was like, well, I don't know. Hopefully it goes well. And 300 plus people showed up to a secular caucus, standing room only. And I can tell you right now, because our marketing was like pathetic, and it was really, we only had a few weeks lead up to get people there. Most people were there because they saw secular caucus on the program when they walked in, and they made a beeline for it. And I can tell you why. It's because if you are a Democrat in Texas, that we have a problem with separation of church and state. No one needs to explain to you that that non-religious people don't have a voice, and that religion is intruding on government, because you live it every single day. So at that convention, that was the first time we had done something like that. And two amazing things happened. One was the amount of people who showed up. Two was that prior to this convention, I had put up 6 planks, or some places they call them resolutions, and 3 of our planks were incorporated into the Texas Democratic Party platform that year. And one of them called for removing the religious test for office, which is unenforceable but still on the books in the Texas state constitution. And again, I remind you, we did very little marketing. Like, we really didn't know how this was going to all come together, but we just create the space for people to be secular Democrats and to talk about these issues, and they show up. I bring that up because that caucus, which is now an official part of the Texas Democratic Party, led to the formation of other caucuses in other states. And that's what led to the establishment of Secular Democrats of America, which is now a network of caucuses. The reason I'm bringing this up is because you're asking me how to get on this council, right? So one of these caucuses that was inspired by Texas was Secular Democrats of Nebraska. And I was working on trying to get a resolution passed at the DNC, because they have regular meetings throughout the year.
And national now?
National. Now we're talking national. So we're trying to get a resolution introduced that would acknowledge and welcome the religiously unaffiliated into the party. But to get that done, you need a DNC member to introduce it. And guess who was willing to introduce the resolution? Ron Kaminsky, a DNC member from Nebraska. Why Nebraska? Because there's a secular caucus in Nebraska, and that secular caucus had conversations with their leadership about why they wanted to form a caucus and why it was so important to make sure that the Nebraska Democratic Party was creating a space for non-religious Democrats. And I can tell you that the caucus leaders there have told me that they have members in their caucus who, before the secular caucus existed, were not involved in the Democratic Party, not because they didn't support the party and vote for the party, but they didn't feel welcome. They didn't feel there was a space until there was a secular caucus that they could join within the party. And so I fly to California. I think it was San Francisco when that DNC meeting happened, because I was working on that resolution, and the resolution was passed. And I attended the other parts of the program, and I attended the Interfaith Council meeting, and I left elected. And I wasn't even trying. I was there to advocate for the
Right.
inclusion of non-religious people on the council. And then they said, well, how about you? And I said, I'd be absolutely happy to serve, right? So I'm telling you that especially in politics, but also when it comes to talking to your elected officials, those are two different arenas. So much can happen when you just show up. When you just show up and have some people power.
One of the things that it seems to be happening is when you start this in Texas and you put forward the planks, it sounds like there were a lot of people who wanted this, but they didn't have that outlet yet.
Yes.
And so what you're doing is you're not just organizing and mobilizing, you're making this presence of people who have secularism as a goal. It's giving them this outlet, it's giving them this focus, it's giving them this direction. And is that what you think happened in Texas?
100%. And what happens is you draw from two places when you do that in democratic organizing, with secular Democrats in particular. You draw from secular communities, which a lot of secular, atheist groups, agnostics, human, people who are kind of part of that community, a lot of them are Democrats, not all of them, right? But a lot of them are. But they may not be involved in the party because, that just may not be their top, identifier as a Democrat. They vote Democrat, but they won't get involved, or they might not feel welcome, especially in a place that's very religious. So you create a space for them to merge those identities. And it's the same thing for the other pool of people, which is people who are Democrats first. That's all they do. They're involved with the Democratic Party, and they happen to be secular, and they happen to agree with the fact that we have too much religion intruding in government. And they say, hey, I'm a Democrat, but I'm also secular, and I really am behind this agenda. And yeah, I think we need to be more visible. And yeah, I think the party could be more welcoming. And yeah, we need to mobilize secular voters, and we need to increase the amount of non-religious people elected to office. And you pull from both of those places because you're giving the same value to both of them, which is the ability to merge and be both a secular person and a Democrat at the same time.
Yeah. Which is something like we see in the general voting patterns, which is that like we know that atheist, agnostic, none of the above are about the same size as white evangelicals, but get nowhere near the same recognition. But now you're saying like these are ways that inside party politics it's beginning to happen. What was
Yes.
what was the resolution that you passed at the Democratic National Committee?
It was Resolution 38. I think it was titled "Welcoming the Religiously Unaffiliated into the Party." I'd have to pull it up. And it acknowledged our values. It acknowledged, what we bring, uh, both in demographics, but also and in values, right? Which that was really important, because we're so often portrayed as not standing for anything, as not believing in anything. And it's like, well, you don't need to believe in supernatural things to have really strongly held beliefs. And we certainly actually think about what right and wrong and how we want to be governed and how we want the world to look like. We think about that quite a lot because we think that there's only one life and one world. And so we that message doesn't get out there enough. And it really reinforces that stereotype that, you can't be a good person unless you believe in God. So that was a really important part of that resolution, is just having on paper that the party was recognizing that we do have values and that we have something to bring to the table to the party.
I sort of have this theory that non-religious people in general are more sort of left-leaning. And I feel like, like we can sort of see this, I guess, like in the last presidential election, about 75% of nuns, I guess, went for Biden. So I wonder, like, do you agree? The first question is like, do you agree that there seems to be something that secular people are more left-leaning? And if you agree, then why do you think that might be?
Well, it's not really a matter of me agreeing. Like, that's just the facts. Like,
Right.
the data shows it, right? So, like, Joe Biden received 71% of the vote from religiously unaffiliated voters. Um, and by the way, we made up 25% of voters in 2020. I want to really emphasize that that's a really huge
Yes.
deal
Yeah.
because that's up from 17% in the 2018 election. And, according to Pew, without the religiously unaffiliated, Trump would have had a 9-point popular vote margin over Biden. So we're really making a difference at the margins here. Atheists in particular are the most left. And I remember seeing a presentation by Ryan Burge, who's a Baptist minister who does a lot. He just wrote a book on the nuns. And I remember him showing that atheists actually perceive themselves as left of the Democratic Party. So they're even more left. And then agnostics are not quite as left as they are, but they're still pretty left. And then it's the nothing in particulars that are a lot less left. It's not that they're not left at all, but it's a lot. It's a very different demographic part of the nuns. So that's definitely the case. So if you're asking me why, what I can say, and I think answering that question is a huge part of what secular Democrats need to do, right? Because that's what's the key to energizing the base of non-religious voters. I have found from doing grassroots organizing in this community that there are certain things about having a secular perspective that I think tend to make you more aligned with the Democratic Party's positions on issues. So, for example, the entire debate about same-sex marriage. The winning message for a lot of people was knowing people that were LGBT, love is love and all of that. But most secularists, I think most of the time that this was going on, were shaking their heads and thinking, this is really obvious, right? This is a civil institution, and it's a contract, right, that the government gives you, that acknowledges your partnership. And this idea about this whole thing about marriage being defined by has to take place between a man and a woman, that's some religious perspective. It's not even everyone's religious perspective. That doesn't have a place in the debate from our perspective, right? So it shouldn't have even been given the platform that it was, because what is some religion's idea about what marriage should be? Why should that impact a secular government's policy on something that's really a contractual agreement, a recognition of it, that has a bunch of tax and civil rights implications, right? So I think the entire perspective on those issues is kind of different. Another example I'll give is I have found that the community in general is extremely supportive of medical aid in dying, which is, if you're not familiar, it's the right to end your life on your own terms if you are facing a terminal illness, so that you have some autonomy when you are facing immense pain and suffering. I think that is something that really gets at the core of our view on autonomy, on bodily autonomy, and our view on life. Because our view on life, I think, tends to be, obviously, I don't speak for all non-religious people, but I do think that there's a through line there where, for us, life is really, really precious. We only have one of it, but we may not necessarily think that life at all costs, as long as possible, we weigh that against suffering. And part of that is because there's no afterlife, right? So
Right.
why would we want to spend
Yes.
our last few days after, in absolute agony or as a vegetable, right? Like, we fundamentally view these things very differently because we lack this idea that there's an afterlife, and we don't have the kind of hangups about, and guilt and shame and, that might come with religion that would impact these kinds of our views on these things. And I think that the overall overwhelming pro-choice stance of most secular people is also related to that, right? Like, don't tell me what to do with my body, and don't tell me how to die, right?
Yeah.
It's really, I think, bodily autonomy, when you don't have these hangups of religion where you're kind of accountable to a deity, I think that it leads you to these certain things. And I'll just say one more thing here, which is on climate change, because several polls have shown that the non-religious really rank this issue at the top. This is a top issue for non-religious people, and it really distinguishes our demographic from some other religious groups that may also care about the issue, but it may not actually register as number one like it does for us and a few other groups. And I think the reason is probably because of our secular perspective. It's not like we care more. It's not like we care more or better people than people of faith who care about climate change. But I do think that if you don't think there's an afterlife and that this is really only the one planet we have, you're going to just have a sense of urgency about the climate that folks who maybe care as well just may not it may not register as number one for them because they've kind of got that backstop, right?
It sounds like the way you're framing this, what I'm taking away from it, Sarah, and you can correct me, is it's almost like competing worldviews, where on the one hand, the way Democratic voters see the world or see politics is contractual, it's rights based, it's what's your relationship with the state inside this materialist world, right? We have a secular world. How do we choose to live in it? Whereas the religious worldview is one of both like supernatural powers and eternal traditions. I'm adding stuff here, but they have a different worldview, right? Is that part of what you see with this?
Well, I mean, we do obviously share a the same worldview as a lot of people of faith who are progressive. There's I don't want to make it such a dichotomy because there's a huge part of the Democratic Party that is of faith. So I think it's more about fundamentalists, biblical literalists, and religious conservatives that vote for the Republican Party. Absolutely, I think there's also an element of authoritarianism. I think that if you are religious conservative, where there's kind of very patriarchal ideas about power. Those kinds of dynamics are something that they're used to in their churches and in their belief systems. I think that we are, as non-religious people, first of all, we value critical thinking. We value questioning things, right? You don't take things for granted. And, we're probably more likely to be turned off by that sort of authoritarianism of people telling you how you should live. This is the world, and this is good and this is evil. I think we tend to be a lot more pluralistic in our views because we just don't accept something handed down to us like that. So I think that authoritarianism, I think, goes both ways. I think it makes religious conservatives more likely to vote for people who have a sort of a more authoritarian worldview, and definitely turns off, I would imagine, a lot of non-religious people.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis pretty extensively. But one of the tricky things is that if we move from governmentality, right, like where we do government work, that sort of politics, and we think of this sort of like the political milieu of America, like that sort of belief is everything. You have to obey God. God dictates this to us. We need to be godly. Woman was made for man, etc., etc. That's still part of like the American culture in general. And we know that one of the things that this has really impacted is perceptions of atheists, right? That non-believers are the last group that someone would elect, right? Like we know that there's an inherent distrust of atheists. If you make a list of like people, can you be gay and become president? That's okay. Can you be left-handed and become president? It's not a problem. Can you become an atheist and be president? And that's when you lose majority support.
Oh, that's changed actually. So it's now over 50% of
It's now
Americans
over
vote atheist.
50%.
It is over 50%.
But
That's not great.
still,
I think I looked at it
that?
this morning. I think it was, I don't quote me on it. I think it was like 54%.
It's great that it's changing and improving. But here's the thing that I want to ask to you. Have you, in your work, have you gotten to a place or ever been in a situation where you see this sort of tipping point, where we go from where being an atheist is a political liability to a condition where it's just another thing?
I think the turning point is kind of in real time now, and we have a number of years to go, and it really depends where you are. But look at Congressman Huffman, right? He came out as openly non-religious and said he didn't believe in a God. He's in a pretty safe district in California, but even for him, When he tells the story, he had a lot of doubts. He had a lot of people who told him not to do it. Imagine that, like a congressman from in a blue district in California, wondering what might happen politically if he comes out publicly as an atheist. And one of the best things that happened was that nothing happened, right? Like, that's the end of his story, is that he came out openly, and he got no negative feedback, and he only got positive feedback, and that's wonderful. But so that's a big step. And not only that, but he founded the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which I think last time I checked has now 14 members. Now, he's the only open non-theist in that caucus, but you know what? Part of that caucus's mission is to stand up for the rights of non-religious people. So that's a huge accomplishment, and that's a big change. We've never had a caucus like that before. But at the same time, right, like I really try to remind people of the long game here, because that's something to celebrate, but in the big picture we have a really long way to go, right? Because there's definitely more atheists in Congress than just Congressman Huffman. There's definitely more, but they see it as a political liability. And you know what? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. It really depends on their district. It's not as much of a liability as people think it is, especially in blue areas. There's a lot more people who should have the courage. But then there's also places where, it'll be used against them. I mean, Gail Jordan ran for office in Tennessee, and the lieutenant governor attacked her publicly for being an atheist, right? So it's not like we haven't seen candidates targeted for their atheism or for their perceived, atheism. But we are making a lot of progress. We're seeing many, many more openly non-religious candidates than we've seen before. We're seeing some of them get elected. But the long game picture here is you have to remember that the Christian right is now reaping the benefits of decades of work. Decades, right? We're basically starting now.
Right.
So and that's not to be negative. That I do think that we will overcome this, but it's important to keep perspective that we have probably 30 to 40 years of organizing and building infrastructure to go, and that's not something to be feel despair about. It's something to feel resolve about. That we have to counteract decades of the Christian right building power, which is why one of the things I really want to get out to your listeners is, do not look at the trend of the non-religious increasing and think that things will just change on their own. That is not how things work. I can think of a million issues today where the majority of Americans support it, but that's not the policy, right?
Yes.
And we have you can have small interest groups that don't represent majorities having disproportionate amount of power. And so we cannot be apathetic. We can't take it for granted that, oh gosh, well, as the country becomes more secular, then our the way we're governed will just reflect that. That's just not true. And so we have to build infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is almost everything the Christian right did. They had their own media ecosystem, right? Like hundreds, maybe even thousands of radio stations, their own, mass media companies where they put out their messaging. They've got really, really sophisticated networks of people who are building relationships with legislators constantly. They have raised tons and tons of money to do all kinds of initiatives, right? I'm not going to get into all of it. It's very well documented by a lot of people who have been studying the Christian right. But, things like groups like the Secular Coalition for America and the American Humanist Association, all those organizations are doing, the Center for Free Thought Equality, there's organizations that are doing the work. They need your support. They need your money. They need your time. We need to do more. And we need to do more for the next 30, 40, 50 years, and we will get there. So I think we need to put into context our successes in the last few years as really something to celebrate, but they're small steps, and we can celebrate them kind of with cautious optimism that with more work on our end, there's more to celebrate in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I wanted to ask what your take on the sort of atheist movement is today, like with regard to, we were talking earlier just about atheists and other secular people being left leaning, But I wonder if there's sort of like a rightward trend among some online atheists. I mean, particularly reflected in sort of an opposition to so-called wokeness. I wonder if you see that. And I wonder if Republicans are doing anything to harness the secular demographic.
So that's definitely happening. There's no doubt. It's very concerning, but I don't think that it's the majority. I think that it's a very loud minority well, it's definitely minority if you just look at the data, right? The majority I mean, I think I used 71% of the unaffiliated voted for Biden. There's always been a chunk of the unaffiliated who tend to vote Republican, and then some, not an insignificant amount, that vote third party, or a lot of them aren't registered there. A lot of them are independents. So there's that. But I think in terms of, but obviously not every religiously unaffiliated voter who voted for Trump is necessarily like the most right. It's probably a spectrum, and I'm not as familiar. I don't even know to what extent we have data on the views of Republican non-religious folks. But I will say that a loud minority can also do damage, right? I do worry about when we already have so many misconceptions about who atheists are, to have very loud alt-right people, atheists out there is definitely concerning. So the second part of your question, you said, do you see that? And what was the second part?
Just if Republicans are doing anything to kind of tap
Right,
into the
right.
voting base, yeah, or voting bloc.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Right. So I think it is highly unlikely that the Republican Party is anytime soon going to be doing much of anything to try to recruit non-religious people, because the non-religious people who are voting for them now, first of all, represent a minority, and I don't think they would look at the numbers and say, gosh, this is such a huge opportunity, because the non-religious who are voting for them now are voting for them in spite of the fact that the entire party has been hijacked by white evangelicals, which means that the non-religious who vote for them clearly don't put church-state separation at the top of their agenda when they vote, right? Like, they might be non-religious, but that's clearly not why they're voting for Republicans, because if they were, that just wouldn't make any sense. Their basis is, I mean, they have a problem because white evangelicals are making up less and less of the population, so they do have a problem there. So maybe in the future, when it's kind of mission critical for them to find other voters, maybe they'll try something. But I really don't think they're so embedded with white evangelicals. In order to appeal to non-religious people, they'd have to make some changes that I don't think would make their base very happy. So I think if they're going to be appealing to non-religious people, it's not going to be around them being non-religious. It's going to be whatever other reasons they're attracting those folks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
And one other thing I'll say, though, is that because I have seen some, kind of right-wing atheist groups, go to CPAC, for example, and like brag. And I'm just like, the most I think we'll see is being a useful token.
Right.
That's
yes,
what
right.
that's going to do.
Right.
You're going to be a useful token, and that's it. You're not going to have a real seat at the table because this party is run by white evangelicals.
Outside of the Republican Party, well, even outside of party politics, a broad secular movement can occur, whether it's left or right, Republican or Democrat. And like you said, it's not this matter of demographics. It's not a matter of time. It's about actually like organizing, mobilizing, building a structure, building a secular base. And in this regards, you have not been an idle observer. You instead formed Secular Strategies. Tell us about your organization. How did you form it? What does it do? What have you been doing?
Yeah, sure. So just to be clear, Secular Strategies is a company. It's an LLC. It's a consulting firm. So I'm not a nonprofit. But what I do is, I like to think of myself as kind of an engine for really excellent activism in the secular space. I try to really inject as much efficient, energetic, good work toward the cause through just excellent strategic work. So, really pride myself on high quality work that has an impact. And all of my clients that I work with, which range from nonprofits to PACs to startups, are in some way connected to the secular cause. So I'll just mention a few of them really quickly. Smart Recovery, if you're not familiar, is a nationwide organization that provides free peer recovery support meetings for those who are dealing with addiction. And they provide, I think, about 6,000 meetings in the US, and they also provide meetings worldwide. They provide them in communities, and they also provide them in prisons. And it's an excellent nexus of church-state separation work and advancing science and evidence-based policy, because that's one thing I think people forget is that when you say don't base laws on dogma and religion, you're also saying laws should be based on evidence and data and science, right? What I love about working with SMART is that we can have conversations on both sides of the aisle about why there needs to be more access to secular recovery options, because most people get referred to faith-based programs. And listen, there's nothing wrong with AA and NA. It works for a lot of people. It just doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody, including people of faith, necessarily want faith to be a part of their recovery. It doesn't work for everybody. There's another aspect of it, though, which is that 12-step programs are not expressly supportive of medication-assisted treatment. And that is a huge, huge problem. If you are by day going to your doctor and you're being prescribed medication assisted treatment, so this is just a little bit brief background on MAT. We know now, thanks to science, what happens to your brain when you are, for example, addicted to heroin. This idea that you can just go cold turkey and get over it with the sheer willpower is just not a scientific perspective based on what we understand about what happens to people chemically when they are addicted. The withdrawal symptoms can make you so intensely sick that it is nearly impossible to overcome. And that's where medication-assisted treatment has been so critical for making advances in addiction recovery, right?
And NA doesn't support that?
No, so they don't, while they don't have an explicit policy against it, they don't have an express policy in support of it. And culturally, we know that a lot of people will go to an NA meeting, and if they share that they are taking MAT, that they will be shamed for it. They'll be stigmatized. I've heard stories from people saying that they were told they weren't clean, that they're not allowed to talk in the meeting. So imagine you're doing what you're supposed to do by day, and then you go to your community meeting, which we know this is also, best practices, science-based approach, that having peer recovery meetings is a huge part of recovery, that we need to have that available to people. But if you have that cognitive dissonance, if you have doing the right thing by day and then you go to your meeting and you're being told that you're not doing the right thing, how can that possibly be good for your recovery, right? And so there's a real public health element to this, but there's also a church-state separation aspect to it as well, because you've got people in the court system who are being presented with the option of you can have your sentence reduced, or you can have a more favorable parole arrangement, or all kinds of different situations you might be in the court system, where recovery meetings is part of your option to get a reduced sentence, or and if the only option you're provided for is faith-based, you're essentially, the government is coercing you to attend a faith-based program.
Because it's located in the church basement or whatever.
Well, even if it's not, 12-step programs, part of the steps it includes acknowledging a higher power. So it's part of the program no matter where you are. Now, the level of emphasis on that depends on the meeting, but courts have found time and time again that 12 steps is pervasively religious. But now, and so one of the things I'm working on right now for SMART is we have a bill introduced in the New York Assembly that would make sure that anytime someone is in this situation in New York, that they are, first of all, informed that they have a right, a constitutional right to a secular option, that they have to acknowledge they've received that information. If they request it, they have to be provided with that option. And this is a great example of how we can be involved in our communities in a way that isn't just about the kind of traditional atheist issues that you think of, right? It's not just the 10 Commandments on government property. It's real life issues that impact people's lives. So that's one example. That's one out of a number of clients that I work with. It's really fun. I get to do different things every day. So one day I'm working with volunteers, running their meetings, empowering them to take action. One day I might be setting up meeting with legislators around, a bill. Yesterday I had that meeting with caucus leaders talking about how we can best support them in 2022. It's all at the end of the day about how can we empower people who share these values of separation of church and state, a pluralistic society that really includes people of all faiths and none, and start building power for ourselves and for people who subscribe to that worldview. And making part of it is half the battle is just making that worldview known. And especially, going back to our discussion about the Democratic Party, I think really making the case to the Democratic Party that our values are aligned, but we also have something to bring to the table. We're not just another constituency that they just need to get out to the polls. We have something to say about these issues, because there are issues that when you do not apply a secular lens, you can end up with bad policy. You end up with broad religious exemptions, for example, to things that we might celebrate because it's a non-discrimination, resolution or law. But then if it has a religious exemption in there, well, guess who's going to be discriminating? Most likely, religious business owners. So it's things like that, or looking at reproductive rights and applying a secular lens. The way that we think about these issues is distinct, and I think adds value to the conversation, adds value to the strategic approach to the Democratic agenda. And I think outside of party politics, I think our community really needs to gain some confidence, right? That we have something to say. We have something that we stand for. We add value to the conversation.
I mean, you are definitely adding to the conversation. This is sounds like you've cast an incredibly wide net, and we've seen from talking to people at the Secular Coalition, talking to other activists, atheist activists who form their own groups, all of these pieces coming together. And this is a place where we see all of them meet up, right? Both aspects of like daily life, organizing, how we help one another, how we shift the culture, and even things just like saying what we are really seems to matter. Which brings us to things a true atheist can do. Nathan, can you tell us more about talking about a true atheist?
Yes. Yeah, Sarah, we have a lightning round that we do at the end of each episode.
Oh, God.
There's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
There's no wrong answer.
You said that you're an agnostic atheist, and so the questions we ask someone things that a true atheist can do or not do. I mean, it's all sort of tongue in cheek. So for example, can a true atheist say "Oh my God" or something like that? So anyway, so we've got a few questions for you, and yeah, if you're ready for it.
I am ready.
Okay. All right. The first question: can a true atheist make a wish when blowing out birthday candles?
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
That's easy, right? I guess this should be, can a true agnostic
atheist? Yeah, right.
Sarah, can a true agnostic atheist find meaning in a universe seemingly without any purpose?
Yes.
How do we do that?
You make your own meaning. I think this idea that it has to be universalized is really the wrong way to go. I mean, I think we all end up with similar ideas about that, but a meaningful life can mean different things to different people, and I think it's about figuring out what kind of life you want, and when on your dying days, what would make you look back and feel satisfied with how you lived your life and what you were able to experience, and that might be different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yes.
You make it seem so simple.
Yeah. All right, here's another challenging one, potentially. Can a true atheist eat meat?
Yes, but that doesn't. So interesting that you asked that, because there's definitely a lot of people who connect their atheism to their view of speciesism and that kind of thing. And I think I really, really respect that. I want to make sure I make clear that I respect that. And I am a reducitarian. I'm working to reduce my consumption of meat. I don't think I can ever go fully vegan. And that's just due to my own human limitations, because I struggle to eat my vegetables. And I need protein. But I totally respect that. And kind of going back earlier to like, what is it that makes us lean left and progressives, that question, I don't think it's an accident that you're asking me that question, because you've also noticed that there's a connection there, that a lot of people, and Monica Miller is a really high profile one, who's an animal rights activist and also attorney at the American Humans Association. There's a there, but obviously you can eat meat and still not believe in God.
Okay, can a true agnostic atheist be worried about Friday the 13th?
I would say no, but with a caveat that I know that there are people, I think superstition is instilled in you at often a very young age. And so you can rationalize things and say, I know this isn't real, but that doesn't mean it doesn't bring me anxiety, right? So I know that people, so like I guess the answer is no, in the sense that like, if you're really being consistent, you shouldn't be. But I think we have to acknowledge the human element there of like, there are some things that it's like, I can tell myself all day that, eating bugs is going to be the future. And that's, that I should really just, it's really just that I'm conditioned to think it's gross to eat bugs, but that doesn't mean that I can just like put the cricket in my mouth. Like,
Yeah.
I'm looking for protein without meat.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. So the next one, can a true atheist recite the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah, especially the original.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm actually Canadian, so I'm not actually sure. Like, can you say like what is the difference between the two?
The original didn't have under God.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's
They changed that in the 1950s.
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Same with
Is the
is
money
that what they added?
the money too? Maybe. Yeah.
Yep. That was within 2 years of each other. They added "In God We Trust." Our original national motto was "E pluribus unum," which means "out of many, one."
Right. Yeah. Funny what happens when you get rid of that. How about this? Can a true agnostic atheist be afraid of death?
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that one. That sounds. I need an explanation.
Can a true agnostic atheist celebrate Hanukkah or Passover or things like this?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. We're rolling through these.
Yeah, this is easy.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, I can just super quickly on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that well, first of all, especially the examples you used, I mean, I'm culturally Jewish, right? These things have meaning to me outside of the religion, and there are ways to celebrate anything in a secular way. So, I have a partner from a Muslim family. And so, when we have children, we're going to do Jewish holidays and Muslim holidays, but we're going to do them in a secular way. Especially once children are at the age where you can explain things to them, like it's really not that hard. You just explain that, this is where this comes from. This is what it means to our family, and this is why we celebrate it this way. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like there's value to these things, and they have historical meaning that is valuable, right? It tells us the story of our ancestors, the story of human history. I mean, especially with Jewish holidays, a lot of them are about remembering what happened to the Jewish people over 2,000 years of persecution. And that's an important story to tell. And you can tell, myths and just recognize them as myths.
All right, last one, and this is not a trick question. Can a true agnostic atheist vote Republican?
No, vote Democrat. Obviously you can. We've got people who vote Republican or atheists, but you should really not do that.
Yes.
And I think we've heard plenty of reasons why not over the course of the past hour. Sarah, it's an incredibly lively talk. Are there any plugs that you want to make before we go?
Yeah, definitely check out secularstrategies.com. You can subscribe to the newsletter, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. If you're listening and you're the head of a local group, or you have a group of people that are like-minded and you just want to take action and do something, I do presentations, I do trainings, I do advocacy days. I can pretty much do anything you want me to do that will make you and the group of people that you work with or in community with feel empowered. So you can always reach out and see what we can do for you there. And just really want to make everyone I know we're in a really dark time right now, right? Where we're seeing resurgence of COVID. We are in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And so rather than feel despair, please channel that into resolve, because we need people who believe in science, who understand the value of science-based policy, and a pluralistic vision for what our now very angry and politically divided society could actually be. If and you are part of that. You cannot sit on the sidelines. Don't think that you need any special sauce or a PhD or anything. Don't let those hangups get in the way. Please get involved in any way you can, because we need you in the fight.
All right. Well, that was amazing. Informative, powerful, a lot of energy and optimism there. What are your big takeaways, Nathan?
I think one takeaway is that it seems as though the Democrats are making more of an effort to engage with secular voters, because they do seem to represent a potentially very large segment of the demographic, and a growing segment
Right?
that can be tapped into. The one thing I guess we should say is that we're not like partisans of the Democratic Party per
No,
se or
no,
anything.
absolutely
Um,
not.
yes.
Yeah.
Just that, well, I'm Canadian, so I mean, it doesn't even matter for me. But I guess it's just that, like, in the contest of if it's just Democrat versus Republican, that in pretty much every case, I guess we would both probably prefer the Democrat.
I think anti-Republican is
Yeah.
the probably where we would stand. And Sarah pointed out one of the big reasons that there's this trend, and she helped kind of explain it and also point to something more positive about it. That on the one hand, like, we know how strong secular voters go for Democrats, right? We know that the Republican Party is beholden to white evangelicals, right? And it makes sense for white evangelicals to vote Republican in that sense.
Yeah.
But one of the points it's really important to drive home is that it's not an automatic thing, right? It doesn't have to stay that way. Although the Democrats are the ones making, as she said, right? In part, she's responsible for this.
Yeah.
The Democrats are taking positions that reflect our values,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Mm-hmm.
important. And as she said, it's not an automatic thing. It doesn't just happen because we grow as a segment of the population. It's because people show up and do the work.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was really a good point I think she made towards the end of the podcast about just saying that it's not enough to be even to have a majority. I mean, like, in terms of, like she said, like, there's all sorts of issues where the majority of the country feels a certain way, but the law is a different way. I think probably, like, maybe like guns are an example. Like, I think it's probably the case that
Oh, guns, universal
most of
health
the
care.
country, yeah, right, yeah, favor these things, and yet for all sorts of reasons it doesn't happen. But I think, I mean, it was really interesting just the way she sort of explained some of the stuff about getting different bills passed or whatever. Just that it, like, it makes it seem less mysterious when she was talking about it, I think. I mean, the
Yeah,
way you can
definitely.
kind of
Yeah, it's a great little peek behind the curtain.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the point that she made, and I think this is definitely true for her. The way she phrased it was, if you show up, things will happen. It's not. I don't think it's that automatic, and it's not going to be true for everyone. But I mean, the thing I would like to remind everyone who's listening is that things won't happen unless you show up.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of piggyback on this comment, to expand it for what we've been doing, this project of Beyond Atheism, we're starting to see how not only how different strategies work, like how different things you can do, but we're starting to see how they work together,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Hmm.
we know what it means to be an atheist, and not just not proselytize, not try to go convert people, but just exist as an atheist, and how that has network effects. What
Hmm.
it means to
Yeah.
join an atheist organization, or what it means to be confrontational, like the way the Satanic Temple does.
Yeah,
or
that's true.
what it means to do grassroots political organizing, the way the Secular Coalition does. All of these things feed together, and the more you organize, the more you put your voice out there and find the thing that's right for you. That's what makes this happen, right? Where are you most comfortable? Where can you be the most effective? What are the things that you most need, and what can you bring? And that, I think, is the most positive takeaway from this.
Yeah, I think it is like it's partly about organizing. I mean, it's one thing to say that 25% of the country or whatever is religiously non-affiliated, but then if they're not organized in any way, they don't have quite the same power. I mean, because she was saying, like it's a lot better if you can say to a politician, like, behind me is this organization of however many people, and we're kind of like motivated to vote in such a way, like if you don't do this or that. I mean, like that's so much, yeah, much more concrete, I guess, than just saying we're a large part of the demographic. But yeah.
Yeah, if you are in a group, and the other thing is that this is another tool in the toolbox. So if you are in an atheist organization or a secular organization, humanist organization, and you want to begin lobbying efforts, you want to figure out how to meet your congressperson. Sarah, this is what Sarah's firm does. You can check it out at Secular Strategies. Yeah, I mean, it's a great resource if
Yeah.
that's the direction you're ready to move into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea, like for any kind of group who wants to do kind of advocacy or activism, could be something to look into. Oh, we should say too, we have like a bonus section with Sarah where that's available to patrons
We
of
get
our
the dirt. That's what
Patreon.
happens. That's when
Yeah.
all the gossip comes out.
Mm-hmm.
The little behind the
Yes.
scenes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we asked about some of the kind of the basics about lobbying and also some of her funny encounters with different politicians. So definitely subscribe to our Patreon and then you can check out that bonus segment.
Yeah. Yep. Send us
Mhm.
the yeah.
Yeah.
Where is the Patreon? How would people find that, Nathan?
We'll put the link in the description. I think it's, yeah.
Links in
Yeah.
the description
Yes.
below. Make sure you
Yes.
press all the buttons next to it when you're doing that.
Yes.
What else is there? So we got, oh man, it feels like this list gets bigger and bigger. What do we need to do? Shout out to Red Japan. That's
Yes.
big.
That's, yeah, got to do that.
Link, is that one of the things people need to do? No,
Link.
subscribe.
Subscribe. Yes.
Yeah. Like.
Subscribe, like,
Oh man, at least I didn't
um,
say lick. That would have been embarrassing.
yeah. And if you can give it a rating and a review, that's,
Positive rating and
yeah,
review.
positive. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
No messing around. Yeah, so any complaints or problems? Nath G. Alexander at the Twitter.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Another success, Nathan. We did it.